Hey there, Resume Lezlie here, and nice to see everyone. Happy Tuesday. Nii Ato, thanks so much for being here. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday to you too. Happy to be here. It's beautiful here in New Jersey. I think we're gonna hit the 60s consistently this week. So as a summer baby, I'm very happy.
Glad to hear it. It's gorgeous here in Arizona as well. We are actually headed out right after this live and we're going to Vegas. It is very hot in Vegas, but we'll be plugged in and parked in an RV park. So I am excited. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here for today's Behind Hiring. We are very excited about our guest today, Madison Butler. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in just a moment. First, though, if you have not already, go ahead and like this video so that other people in the world of LinkedIn will see it. Go ahead and comment. Let us know where you're watching from. Nii Ato is in New Jersey. I am in Arizona. Where are you watching from? Also, if you're checking out the replay, please go ahead and like and comment as well. We always like to see who is watching the replay and catch up with you there. For those of you who are in the chat while we're live, you'll see my partner, Andy Shears. He is my partner in both business and life. He helps me with all of these lives. He will try to answer any questions that you might have and also just help keep things rolling in the comments section. Hey, Thomas from Philly, thanks for being here. Let's see, we've got Rhonda from Fort Worth, Texas. Good to see ya. We've got Kalia from Denver and Annie from Green Bay. So many people watching from all over the country. That is super cool. Okay, well, thank you again for being here on this fabulous Tuesday. As I mentioned, this is Behind Hiring, where Nii Ato and I interview recruitment experts, hiring experts, and anyone who has a unique view behind the scenes of the hiring process so that we can help job seekers understand what's going on and ultimately brainstorm some better solutions for a broken system. Today, we have with us guest Madison Butler. Madison is a former recruiter and a fierce advocate for being human at work, among other human rights topics, including Black rights, women's rights, and LGBTQ rights. I admire her immensely. And for those of you who have listened to me and heard me talk about long-term networking strategies, the fact that Madison is on Behind Hiring today is proof positive that long-term networking strategies work. I have been engaging with her and learning about her and following all the wonderful things she puts out there. And it has culminated in this amazing opportunity to interview her today. So I am thrilled to have her here. How about you, Nii Ato?
Yeah, no, this is really exciting. I've also been a fan of Madison's for quite some time. And the story of her being here today is wonderful, proof positive for all those job seekers out there listening, that if there's someone you'd like to engage with their content and follow them and provide value. And by the time you finally reach out to them to say, hey, can we please talk? They would have seen your name a couple of times, and it's a warmer connection than if you just were to cold email them out of nowhere and ask for them to spend some time with you. They don't know who you are. And so it's a much heavier lift for them to actually engage with you. And so wonderful story for that. And Madison is a great guest. I just want to remind everyone out there listening that part of our mission is to empower job seekers by emphasizing the human element involved in hiring and consistently addressing DEI and raising awareness that job seekers have more power than they realize. And Madison is probably is the perfect guest to have on today, who really embodies this part of our mission. And so we're excited to have her and to dive into this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I could not have said it better. Thank you so much, Nii Ato. And without further ado, I will go ahead and bring on Madison. Hey, Madison,
Hey,
thanks so much for being here.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Good,
thank you.
good,
Thank
good.
you.
I'm thrilled to hear it. It is wonderful to see you here and have the chance to sit down and have this conversation with you. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and dive into the first question. So we've talked a little bit about how you're a fierce advocate for lots of human rights topics. And for a long time now, I have seen you as a brave, outspoken, unapologetically Black, unapologetically queer public advocate. Have you always been so brave and outspoken, or is this something that has changed in you over time?
Oh God, no. I actually, I write, and I'm writing a book about it right now, actually. But I was very much not like this. I'm biracial. I grew up in a very white bread neighborhood. My mom thought she was doing the best for me by always sending me to private school. So I was in private school from the time I was 2. And as you can imagine, like, that kind of forces you to feel like you have to lean into whiteness in order to be successful, or you have to lean into heteronormativity to be successful. And so I actually ended up in like my early 20s with a ton of like internalized anti-Blackness and a ton of internalized hatred. And then I ended up dating someone who was really bad for me, as I think a lot of us have done. But our relationship was really volatile. It was incredibly violent. And I like had this like moment of like a come to Jesus moment, despite being an atheist, of like, I'm not going to make it out of this relationship alive. I need to go. And so I ended up like escaping in the middle of the night with nothing but my dogs. And our relationship in general, although it had been violent, I actually think the worst part about it was like the racism. And so when I got out of it, I like had even more internalized hatred for myself because I'd been like conditioned to it for the last 3 years. And then our relationship like made BuzzFeed. And it made like every national news outlet. I remember my mom calling me and being like, they're talking about you on XM radio. And I was like, great, awesome. And this was the first time that I realized, oh my God, I'm Black. Because every single story that people made up about me, regardless of his abuse that went viral, was because I was Black. It was, she must be a sugar baby, or she's unemployed, or she's on food stamps, or whatever it was. The assumptions they made about me were based on my skin. And so it was like a real slap in the face, because I'd spent my whole life trying to fit into this stereotype and into this narrative of the right way to be Black. And then it didn't matter. And so from that point on, I was like, well, then I should just be Black without trying to be anything else or trying to be 2 people every day. And then, you know, I did that for my relationships and my friendships and just like how I showed up in the world. But then I realized like I wasn't doing it at work. I went to an interview and someone was like, oh my God, we love you. But we need you to control your hair, was the phrase she used. Cover your tattoos, take out your nose ring. And we need you to wear a skirt. And I was like, a skirt? No, thank you.
This what 1950s Mad Men,
right? And so, you know, I think we're so conditioned to be grateful when people want us to work for them. So my brain said, thank you, send me the offer and I'll get back to you. But as I got in the car, I was just like seeing red because I realized how many times have we worked for someone or done something for someone and they never actually cared about who I was. They cared about what I could do for them. So that was kind of like my entry into like, no, I deserve to show up to work. However, I need to show up to work, and everyone else should have that same privilege as well. And I realized that no one has it, especially when you're trying to interview. You have to sell yourself, and selling yourself involves leaning into these societal standards that actually don't mean a whole lot.
Oh, I absolutely love your take on that and your bravery in coming away from all of these events that could have pushed you further down and beat you down. And instead you said, you know what? Absolutely not. No. And you decided to kind of go your own way. That's amazing. A couple of things. We're getting some really good comments already, so I wanted to pull those up. It doesn't tell me who it is, but we have someone out there that says, this is such an important topic. I often have felt like I couldn't be myself at work. Looking forward to the conversation. So that's all you, Madison, being here and being able to share your input and your approach on all of this is really, really helpful to people. And then also we have Kalia here who says, control my hair. Oh no. So I think a lot of people are 100% on your side there. Quick follow-up to that question. Would you have any recommendations to someone who wants to be more brave and more of an advocate, but is either maybe a little intimidated or doesn't know kind of how to get started doing those things?
Yeah. So, you know, for me, like becoming one with myself is a different journey than, my like strong advocacy. And so I think one, it's about like, what route are you trying to go? Are you trying to become more in tune with your own identity? Or do you know that you hold a ton of privilege and you're looking to leverage that? And so when it comes to the advocacy piece, I didn't like come out with like all these spicy hot takes, like from the get-go. I remember when I started, my content journey and being out loud about things, I actually started very much with recruiting content. I realized recruiting was broken, and it was much more broken for folks who were from marginalized communities. And I would like, it makes me laugh now, but like, when you're sending like a spicy text message and you're like, okay, I'm going to throw my phone now. That's essentially what I would do. I would like write this spicy LinkedIn content, and then I'd be like, okay, I'm going to close my laptop and I'm going to take a walk. And it like got to a point where like I look back and like those were like my least spicy things in comparison to now. But it was like a buildup. Like I slowly got more confident in my voice, and it does take a lot of knowing that like not everyone is going to like what you say. Human nature is to want to be liked and to want to be accepted. And for me, I think that was the hardest part to get over, is like I made people really angry. And now that like fuels me. But then at that point, I felt like, oh my God, am I going to be like risking job opportunity because people don't like my hot takes and my stance? And then I was like, wait, I don't want to work for people who don't like believe in my hot takes about humanity. And so, for me, it's definitely more of a journey. Like you don't just have to like show up 100% and like, here I am, I'm loud about it. Not every journey has to look like mine. Advocacy can look different for everyone. And wherever you are in the fight, whether that fight is behind closed doors with family members or with your coworkers, or if it's out loud on LinkedIn, or if it's on TikTok or whatever the kids are doing these days, it all matters. Because the point is we have to keep having the conversations, and they matter at scale. Whether you're having them with 100,000 people or you're having them with your mom, they all matter just the same.
Yeah, that's such an important takeaway. The way I'm internalizing it is, work within your sphere of influence. That's going to look different for everybody, but you have access to rooms that neither Madison or I or Lezlie have access to. In those rooms, you have the ability to influence those in front of you who know you, like you, and trust you. So go ahead and leverage that. And if you feel so led to start speaking out on LinkedIn, go ahead and do that as well. And you can grow up to, be like Madison or your own version, of course, individuality, authenticity, of course, right? But you can have and work up to having that voice, and you don't have to come out with that 100% tomorrow. And I was listening to a podcast of a friend of mine yesterday, and there's a friend of mine, she's a feminist career coach, Cynthia Pong. And she was talking about, if you got a book in you, write that book. So I just want to, give props to Madison for doing that. And her advice is that, there's someone out there who needs that book that's within you. So just go ahead and do it. So just wanted to plop that in there.
And I think it's also important to recognize that I have a ton of privilege to be able to be this loud around things that people find scandalous and like obviously hold a ton of stigma. And so that, for me, not everyone can show up like me, and that's okay. We still live in a world where like the things I say could get me fired at other organizations. And so if you want to be an advocate, but you also don't want to risk your livelihood, like I get that. We live in a world that surrounds capitalism and revolves around capitalism. And I don't expect anyone to put their job on the line, especially Black, brown, and queer folks. We all looked at like what Basecamp did recently, and everyone was like praising the people who up and quit. But like, if you also look, the people who up and quit were white folks. And so I recognize my privilege, and that's why I feel like I have to use it, because I walk into companies when I interview now brand first. Like if I'm here, you already kind of know what I'm about. And if you don't, you're about to find out. And like, either you're okay with it or you're not. And I have the privilege of being a little bit more picky with where I work, and not everyone has that privilege. And so that's why it's so important for me to say, work within your sphere of influence, and that influence does not have to be out loud. So many of us still have to be closeted and reserved because that is what the world expects of us. And the reason I do this work is because we should be able to exist out loud. And I'll keep doing this until we all get that option.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Michelle says this conversation is much needed. Amy says, received interview feedback that she needed to have more energy, but that she's a pretty chill and laid back person, doesn't want to be fake in the interview, would feel like she couldn't be her authentic self on the job. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And Douglas says, agreed, the ultimate acceptance is self-acceptance. And I love that that's where you kind of started the story. That's excellent. That's excellent. One more quick question for you. You mentioned your current work, and I know that you focus right now on building inclusive teams from the ground up with early stage companies. I've also seen you refer to yourself as a recovering recruiter. So can you share with us a little bit more about what that means to you and the backstory that led you into recruitment and now to where you are today?
Yeah. So actually, when I left that relationship, I left everything behind because I lived in Texas. He and I had moved to Texas, which looking back was if you've ever been in an abusive relationship, their whole goal is to move you or, keep you away from your family. And that was the ultimate move. I was 1,900 miles away from anyone I knew. So when I left everything. And when I got home, my mom had a friend that was like, hey, I have a recruitment agency. If you want to give it a swing, it's not that fun. But I'm super happy to give you a role. And I was like, all right, cool. I don't know what I'm doing. And up until this point, I had worked in retail as a store manager. So obviously I had been hiring people. I knew that I liked that piece of it. I knew I liked interviewing. I knew I liked really helping people grow into careers they love. So I was like, sure, I'll give it a try. But this was high volume recruiting, and it was actually awful. I had to hire 15 people a week, and it was just a hot mess.
Wow.
But I realized I liked it, not that much, but I liked it. But I wanted to be able to, again, have more impact and hey, can you do this job? Will you show up? Please show up. So I started to think about how can I do this and be a little bit more reined in. So I moved to a consultancy firm where I focused solely on sales and VPs of sales, directors of sales. So at least then it was really about the relationship building. And as I kind of just continued my career, I ended up here in Austin in the tech scene and the startup scene. Realized I really like the startup scene and I really like the tech scene, but I wanted to be able to have impact at scale. And when you are an external consultant, the impact you can have does stop somewhere. And usually they don't really care too much about your opinion on inclusion or their culture. And so I moved internal to a company that is now a unicorn. As my first kind of tech experience, they were 80 people when I started, and now they are 500 people. And I've kind of just continued from there. And so I still do work internally. I'm a VP of people here in Austin. But that first role was when I was like, oh, wait, I want to impact culture at scale. And so I love recruiting, but I can only feel good about recruiting if I can ensure that people have an organization that's actually thought about them before they got here. And recognizes that I can think about people and I need to think about people because I need to ensure that I have a space that's safe for them, while also ensuring that when they get here, they can take up the space they need, which is how I moved more into a people umbrella.
That's really excellent. I love that focus. And it seems like everything that you're sort of about in the career space is letting people have the space to be themselves. And I think that is something even individual job seekers kind of forget about. Like you said, we're so grateful to be given the opportunity to apply or interview or have a job, that even when we're not in a dire situation where we kind of have to take whatever's given to us, we don't think about ourselves. And so I love that self is such a centric focus for what you talk about. And I love you actually mentioned it in your last answer that job seekers have the choice. They can say, you know what, I don't want to work for a company that, like you said, doesn't, get on board with your hot takes about humanity. Job seekers can decide, you know what, I thought this was cool. And then I got into the interview and it rubbed me the wrong way and I don't want to do it. And that is perfectly okay. And it's very empowering. So I love that that's sort of part of your platform that you really speak on.
And, you know, one of the things
Yeah.
I'm writing about is like red flags are not just for dating. It is okay. And like we do that and we do it in dating. 100% we see red flags, but human nature is to want acceptance and we want human connection. So we ignore red flags. We do the same thing in interviewing. We want jobs and we want more money and we want, you know, an offer. And so we ignore red flags. In both instances, those red flags were real and most likely will pop up again at like some non-great time. And so I encourage job seekers to really hone in on those red flags. And they're different for all of us. For me, my biggest red flag is when someone says, "Oh my God, I'm so surprised by how articulate you are." Like, thanks. And so I've become really in tune with those. Like I had a job interview now a couple years ago and they did like a backdoor like check on me. Like they reached out to someone they knew that knew me, which like was fine because I'm great. But for me, that was a red flag because they didn't take into account that that person could have held a ton of biases related to my identity and reached out to them anyway. And so I pulled myself from the process. And so I think about this as, you know, we're really conditioned to like sell ourselves. And you should bring, you know, whoever you need, but like make sure it's actually you. Because part of it is you want people to show their face and their hand. And if you are pretending that you are someone else the whole time, they don't get the opportunity to do that. And I want people to feel valued for themselves at work. Being two people every day is exhausting. And putting on your phone voice from 9 to 5 kind of sucks. And straightening your hair because you feel like you have to, and dressing a certain way because you feel like you have to, it ends up that you aren't as confident in the real you anymore. And that's not fair to you.
Yeah, that's such an important, powerful point. And, you know, you said earlier, and I'm going to paraphrase, if you don't want to work for a company that doesn't embrace your values and doesn't support you being who you want to be in your day-to-day life, and leading a dichotomous life is going to leave you feeling split and, you know, incoherent internally and just not a good look. And you will wear down and burn out eventually. And so it's better not to put yourself in that situation in the first place. So this has been a great segue for the next couple of questions I have. So when it comes to being your whole self, your full self at work, there's a definitely growing discourse around this topic, which you speak about a lot. When you hear the phrase, you know, being your full self, your whole self, number one, how do you define that? And then secondly, what is a first step that employers can take to create an environment that enables people to do that every day?
Okay, I'm going to start with the second question first, and then I'm going to work backwards. Okay. So as employers, as leaders, it is our job to keep our population safe, which means you have to be comfortable with exiting people who are harmful to your organization. And so we talk about putting policies in place around no tolerance, and we're not going to tolerate hatred. We're not going to tolerate homophobia. We're not going to tolerate racism. But for some reason, those policies tend to stop when someone is a high performer. How many toxic sales teams exist because people hit quotas? I've sat close to some really toxic sales teams, but people were good at their jobs, so they weren't exited. And so what we end up doing is protecting people who are abusive. And now they can say, well, I'm obviously not doing that because it's in the handbook and I'm still here. No one said anything to me. Right. So instead of protecting marginalized communities, you protect the privileged ones. And so I encourage people, like, it sucks to have the conversation. And of course, there's a big gap between someone who doesn't know they're being harmful and someone who's being intentionally harmful, despite the impact being the same. And I want to make sure that, like, I hit on that, is like, whether it's a microaggression or like intentionally harmful, it is still harmful. But I'm a really big advocate for, like, I do not keep people in my organization who are intentionally harming people. And if you are, I don't think you have any business hiring people from marginalized communities. If you aren't ready to create an organization and a space for them to feel safe, then you don't belong hiring us. And that's okay. Like, it's okay to own that. Like, we're not ready. And on the flip side, I think when we think about authenticity, it's so often we think about it in this like warm, fluffy, like Rachel Hollis, girl wash your face type thing. And that's not it. Like, not only is that book really bad, one fits all advice doesn't actually work. And so authenticity is exactly what you need it to be. showing up as whole looks different for everyone, because what I need to bring to work and what I need to be successful is different for me than it will be for you. And as someone who is queer, like, some people want to bring that to work and some people don't. And when we talk about the societal trauma that Black folks are going through, some of us want to talk about it at work and some of us don't. Humans are not monoliths. And so for me, authenticity and bringing your whole self to work has to be defined by the person showing up, not by the company on the other side of the table. And I think that is what companies struggle pretty hard with, because micromanaging is a thing and companies like to be in control of the narrative. And in actuality, in order to create a space that is completely safe, you have to be willing to let go of the control of the narrative.
That's really powerful. And I appreciate how you flipped that in terms of letting us, understand that, well, number one, we should be in control defining what that full self is. But then that the company, if they truly intend to create that environment, have to do the opposite of their natural inclination to control and just let go. And not define what, your company issued authentic self should be. That flies in the face of what this whole conversation is about. And so that's a really, really helpful way of framing it. You started talking about safety and making the place feel safe for marginalized individuals. That's a great segue to my next question. Can you help us unpack the term psychological safety as it relates to the workplace? And, what are some of the features that you'd point out that exemplify psychological safety? And most importantly for our listeners, how can they look out for employers that do foster psychological safety? So going back to your red flags conversation, what are red flags? And also what are, positive green flags, if you like, to look out for good places to work?
For sure. So for me, psychological safety is essentially the idea that you don't have to think about who you are. And you don't have to wonder, is it going to be at the detriment of your career if you mention that you and your partner went out to dinner? Or that you say, hey, this week in America was exhausting and I'm just not my best. And so psychological safety is the idea of, like, trauma is trauma. Whether you experience at work or you experience it with a partner, your body reacts the same. And trauma can come in different forms. It can come in the form of exclusion, which is incredibly common. And I know we talk about inclusion a lot. But what we don't hit on is what exclusion feels like. And when you don't feel like you're part of the group, or you feel like you're othered because of who you are, that is traumatic. And there's no way to pretend that it's not. When I think about how you can kind of suss it out, honestly, sometimes it's not in the interview process. I spend a lot of time really looking at organizations. I have no hesitation to reach out to someone who works there, who has worked there. Because when people reach out to me about some of the companies I've worked at, I have no problem being like, ooh, run, run faster. And so for me, I'm looking at company top to bottom. Like, is all of your representation sitting at the bottom of your organization just so you can say that you have Black people? Do you actually care about queer folks, or do you only care about queer folks during the month of June because you wanted to slap a pride flag in your logo because, like, go rainbow capitalism? And so I'm asking these questions in interviews too, like, how do your insurance policies support queer families? How does your handbook policy remain inclusive for folks who identify differently? And these are the questions I'm asking, because I want, if you're truly inclusive, you have an answer, and it's not one that you're going to, like, run me around in a circle. The one I ask pretty often as a Black person is, how do you support your Black community through societal trauma? Because if you didn't allow your Black population to be like, I'm overwhelmed, I'm sad, I'm scared to exist in a country that doesn't value my life, then I don't want to work there. Because I had a ton of times last year where I just needed a break. I talk about, this stuff on a daily basis, and it is emotional labor. And so for me last year, I was just, like, at this point where I was so overwhelmed on all ends of the spectrum, I needed the space to say that. And in regards to COVID, as we think about going back into the office, how are you supporting your population from a go back to work standpoint? Are you forcing them all to go back without asking if people are comfortable being in crowds? Or are you giving people the option to do what works best for their life? I think, if anything that I've learned, at least in 2020, is The output is much more important than the input. And I want to work for a company that understands that. I don't want to work for a company who wants me to just like mindlessly sit in front of my computer for 8 hours if I got all my work done in 6. And those are the things that are so important to me. But as I kind of navigate the startup world, I also want to know like who's pulling the strings. If you work in a company that is funded by someone, there is someone behind the scenes who gets to make decisions. So show me your board, show me your investors. Those things are important because even if your company fundamentally believes in social justice or believes in humanity, none of that matters if their board doesn't feel that way.
Right. They ultimately can make the final decisions or influence the direction of the company. What I want to really highlight to our audience is that Madison shared a number of questions that were relevant, whether it's to her identities or to other people's identities who come from marginalized communities. These were super specific questions that will make the employer show their hand to see if they're being real about what's on their diversity statement and what their website says, or if it's just for show. And the answers are going to be super revealing as to whether or not it's the right place for you to work based on how they respond. These questions might feel a bit challenging, but I think she makes them so specific because you need that specific information. It doesn't give them the chance to gloss over, and as she said, give you the runaround as to whether or not they truly embody and walk out these values from policy and practice standpoint, or if it's just lip service. And I just want to go back to the first thing that Madison said about psychological safety being not having to think about who you are before you speak. And I got to experience that in the 2 years I lived at home in Ghana. I'm from Ghana originally. I did my last 2 years of high school there after growing up in New York from the age of 6 to 16. That was my first experience not having to think about being Black in my life until that point. And it's such a powerful thing when you can just be you. In Ghana, I was just Nii Ato. It was about, do people like me because of my personality or not like me because of my personality? It's much easier to deal with than worrying if every interaction is being impacted by the color of my skin. And so that is such a powerful thing to say, that you don't have to think about who you are, and that's safety. And I just want people to hold on to that. And we want to try and push and advocate for employers and a world where that's not mental work that we're doing as we navigate.
And, I think for me, I ask questions about things that don't impact me. Insurance questions don't impact me. I am a cisgender woman. However, I don't want to work for a company that only cares about some kinds of inclusion. Inclusion and allyship cannot be conditional. And I don't want to work for a company that doesn't think about life from an intersectional lens. And for those who don't know, intersectionality is a phrase coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and there are 3 kinds. There's structural, which is the kind I'm speaking about now, which is essentially how do your identities intersect to essentially figure out how you navigate the world. The other one that's really important as a Black person, as a queer person, is representational, which is how are you portrayed in media, which is why when I open my mouth, everyone just assumes I'm an angry Black woman. And although I sometimes am angry and Black, it is not a state of being. But because media represents us this way, and queer folks are generally hypersexualized, and not everyone, this may be a surprise, has met a Black person or has met a queer person. So their only idea of us is what they see on TV or on the internet or hear about us on the radio. And so when they do have to work with people like me, that's their assumption. Like that's how they think we interact with people. And so I really want companies that think about everything they do through the lens of intersectionality. If you build policies that work for the most marginalized person, it's going to work for the average Chad in his Patagonia vest in finance, I promise.
If I could jump in real quick, Lezlie, because you started going down a question that we have later in the running order. But if you could just build a bit more on the intersectionality piece, when it comes to promoting equity in the hiring process and within the workplace, can you speak a bit more to how employers can be more mindful of intersectionality in building their processes and environments? What are a few additional things they can lean into practically?
For sure. So I think oftentimes when we think about DEI, we think about it in like segmented groups. We think about Black people, or we think about queer people, or we think about Latin people. But we like never talk about when that person is the same person. And that is frequent. No group is a monolith. All Black folks aren't the same. All queer folks aren't the same. And so it's really important to think about what people need on an individual level. And so often we think about what we would need in an instance, or like, what do I need from an insurance package? What do I need from a handbook policy? Without thinking about that, like, there are just people who live and love differently than we do. And so as an employer, I advocate to give the space that people need to take. So oftentimes when we're talking about applications, one, don't make people self-identify. Don't make it a requirement. Not everyone is willing to have that conversation, and they shouldn't need to, because having a coming out party story every time you apply or interview somewhere, it doesn't feel good. But also, so my partner is non-binary, and applying to jobs is weird because the options are usually she, he, or unknown, which is like high key offensive because they're fully knowing of who they are. They just don't relate with either gender. And so leaving people the space to like fill in their pronouns, I think is incredibly helpful. And then even in like the process, being aware of the conversations you're having. You know, one of the first things I ask people is, hey, my name is Madison. My pronouns are she, her. How do you want me to address you? Because for me, I just want people to know that whoever they are, whatever their identity is, it's always going to be safe with me. And I'm going to ensure that their identity is also safe with the other people they talk to. No one should have to announce their identity in every room they're in. And especially in an interview, it feels scary. And I want to take the scariness out of interviewing.
That's really powerful, Madison. That empathy, that far-reaching empathy that you have to want to make sure that people can be themselves is just beautiful. I really, really appreciate that. We've gotten some great comments. Carrie Bird, she was our guest last month and said some great things about DEI. She shared, and unfortunately it looks like it doesn't show the whole comment, but for anybody who's watching, she shared some information and a great link where you can find some more information if you're interested. But she said that Joe Gerstant, I believe, recently spoke about assimilation and inclusion as sitting on a matrix that considers high-low value on belonging and high-low value on uniqueness. And she says inclusion, by extension, psychological safety, sits in the quadrant where both are high. And she says, see the link here. So she's shared a link there if anyone is interested. Douglas talks about psychological safety from an HR perspective. Is an entire spectrum, bottom down and inside out. Love this conversation about who's pulling the strings. This is awesome. We're getting some really, really great engagement. Thank you guys very much. And thank you, Madison, for amazing, amazing content here. Let's see, a question for you. Many job seekers don't really fully understand the role that recruiters play in the hiring process and what the limits are of their power. So can you help us understand the role of internal recruiters and some best practices as to how to network and work with internal recruiters at a target company?
For sure. So someone's pulling our strings too, I promise. Even as someone who doesn't work in internal recruiting anymore, you are essentially beholden to your hiring managers. And they tend to not move as fast as you would love them to, because here's the thing. My full job is recruiting. Not anymore, but in that instance it is. A hiring manager typically is a hiring manager, and they're an actual manager. And at a startup, they're also probably doing whatever it is that their team is doing. And so you can move as fast as they can move. And usually that's not that fast. For me, I'm also a really big believer in networking. I can sit here and say that since I've lived in Austin, I have never worked at a company that I applied for, like on LinkedIn or Glassdoor or whatever. Every role that I've had has come through my network in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes it's been a cold reach out. Like my first tech role, I reached out to the VP of sales and I was like, hey, saw you're looking for a recruiter. I'm a recruiter. I'm actually really good at it. Let's talk. And then they hired me. So, but we had been connected. And so, you know, I did do a cold reach out. And in other instances, it's been people who are like, hey, I heard this role is open. Do you want an intro? or someone wanted an intro to me. So there is a ton of power in networking. And for me, as a marginalized job seeker, I want to take the risk out of it. I don't want to go work for a company that I know nothing about, I know no one there. I'm at a point now where I will never go work for a company that I don't know someone there and I haven't been referred there. Because as someone with such a large personality and brand, it's important for me to know that my voice is not only wanted, but will be safe there. And so for me, like just the power of networking, even in a virtual world, is so important. I hate networking events. Like I don't do them. I really only network on the internet. I'm not really like a social butterfly. Despite how I appear online, I'm very like, ask me to keynote, ask me to get on a stage. That's fine. Please do not ask me to like walk a room with a cocktail, because I'll just like look at it like on my phone and be like, please don't talk to me. Please don't talk to me. And so for me, when right now on LinkedIn, I have 61,000 followers, give or take. A year ago, I had maybe 10,000. And a year before that, I had 2,000. So it's funny because that cold outreach where I said, hey, I'm a recruiter, his response to me was, how many followers do you have on LinkedIn? And I was like, I don't know, like 2,500. And he was like, well, that's a waste of your LinkedIn network. He was like, as a recruiter, like, don't you want people to come to you for jobs? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I never like thought about it that way. And so originally LinkedIn felt really hard to me because it felt like this really cold professional platform, which I don't use the word professional because I don't actually think it exists, but I had to force myself to be good at it. And so this was really before I was like consistently making content. And so what I would do is I would tell myself, I'm going to interact on 5 posts today on people who I admire or I really like their content, and I'm going to connect with 10. And then I would just do that every day. And now here we are, I have 61,000 followers and it's quite overwhelming. But I had to make it a habit for myself. Networking does not come easy. Like no matter who you are, like it feels weird, especially on the internet. But if you make something a habit, it will no longer feel weird. And once your network starts to kind of grow, you can kind of, you don't have to like connect with 10. I don't connect with 10 people a day anymore, mostly because I'm at my maximum connection limit. But it won't feel like a habit or like a chore. And then it gets to a point where you know people who know people. And your sphere of influence is incredibly important, not just in the world of DEI, but when you are job seeking.
Yep. I really, really love that. And also when it comes to networking, when you start to really build relationships, like actually build relationships and not just be out there for what's in it for me, it becomes, LinkedIn or wherever you're networking becomes this place where you go to see your friends and have genuine conversations that expand your mind or help you learn something or allow you to help someone else somehow, which is just an amazing sort of growth feeling in and of itself. So I've had the same experience basically of growing my profile or growing my following rather on LinkedIn. I am not necessarily a social butterfly. I don't go up to people in person and talk to them and whatever. But over especially the last year, but even a little bit before that, growing it felt really awkward at first. And then it just stopped feeling awkward. I started to find my voice. I started to find people that, like you said, I admired and I could follow, like you. I started seeing people like you who made me feel braver to say some things that I might not have said had I not seen people like you and other brave souls out there just telling it like it is. So for anybody, and I think this is a conversation a lot with job seeking in general, job seekers don't necessarily take to networking really easily. But you just got to know it feels awkward for almost everybody in the beginning, and it absolutely pays off if you're putting that time in. So I appreciate you sort of focusing on that. Real quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something on this, Nii Ato?
Oh yeah, I was just going to add that, your intentions are really important when it comes to networking. And so I talk about leading with connecting through curiosity, and that's such a pure and natural instinct that we all have. And that's a beautiful way to reach out to someone because you genuinely care and want to know something more about them. And if you start with that positive intention, that can lead to actually building a genuine relationship and connection, which can in turn transition into whatever it's going to transition into. But if you start out with a transactional focus, then it's not going to go well. People are going to feel used. You're going to feel gross, and it's just not going to go well. And so I think intentions really, really matter. So set your intentions for your networking. That can really guide you as you progress and build real relationships with people.
Yeah.
And so I have like a general rule, like don't sell me something in your first message and don't hit on me. Like don't be creepy. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that on LinkedIn, but having such a large network or platform, please don't. And I know I'm not the only one. It is like rule number one, like don't be creepy on the internet. Like if you wouldn't want your mom or like your partner to read this message, don't send it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Real quick, we've got a good question from the audience here. Michelle wants to know what your view is on blind recruitment selection processes, if you can share with us.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I have like a taboo view on it. If you need to do blind hiring in your interview process, then your company probably isn't set up for safety anyway. If your hiring managers can't make choices without not looking at people, I have some serious concerns around your hiring managers. And I want people to know I'm Black. It is important to me, and not because the optics of it, but because my Blackness has shaped my perspective. And so often when I'm talking about DEI, one, you need to know whose perspective is not at your table. It is okay to be intentional in your hiring. And again, it's not for the optics of it, but it is for the question of whose perspective is not here. And the beautiful thing about that question is there's never a day where you're like, everyone's here, everyone's perspective is here. There is always room to build and continue to grow. But I want people to know that my perspective is different because I am a Black queer woman. And so I'm actually not into blind hiring, mostly because I believe we can only solve human problems with human empathy and human accountability. And if you blind hire and your hiring managers are still racist or homophobes and you haven't actually solved the problem, fixing our hiring practices doesn't help us if we don't solve our organizational problems.
Yes, 1,000%. I just want to that point, you keep on coming back to it. This is, I think, the second or third time about an employer not actually being ready to support diverse employees. And if you're not ready, these are cosmetic changes. These are things you can do to kind of tick a box. But if your, culture hasn't changed, if your practices haven't changed, you're going to expose someone from marginalized community to danger when they start working for you. And so that internal work really has to happen first before you start inviting them in. And blind hiring, I get why you don't like it, because it is a very drastic measure to take in order to kind of leap over a problem, but you haven't addressed the problem. It's still there. And so that makes so much sense.
And, for me, it's just so many companies want it for the optics. They want a Black stock photo to throw up on their career website. And, I will say it until the cows come home, which I'm not really sure when that is, but I think they do at some point. DEI is not about optics. It's never been about optics.
Right.
It is about perspective. And if you are not ready to embrace the different perspectives that exist, then you have more work to do. And I would much rather see a company say we have more work to do and we haven't reached DEI ascension, which none of us have, rather than say that we have no work to do. We're fine. Bring people in and then traumatize them.
Yep.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit and bringing back the topic of privilege. You wrote a really interesting blog, LinkedIn post about the privilege associated with having a good resume. And this is personally very challenging for me to read, and perhaps Lezlie shares this as well, because we're both resume writers. But it doesn't make what you said any less true. But you said that, you're saying that there is a degree of privilege in being able to pay someone like me or Lezlie to write a good resume for them that tells a strong story and about their career. So you actually make a call in that post to hiring managers to look beyond pretty templates and buzzwords and a well-crafted narrative to, I guess, open up their lens in terms of how they do their hiring. But my challenge or my question is, how can hiring managers broaden their perspective and the process to find great candidates who might not have the privilege of being able to pay someone to write an excellent resume for them? how do you square that, round peg?
For sure. So I think for me, it's really about being intentional around what your qualifications are. So often, I'm sure y'all know, hiring managers put qualifications on there that don't matter. One of the ones I saw one the other day that was like hiring for a in-house counsel, and it said they only wanted someone from a top tier school, which is probably like the most privileged statement you can put out there, because who can afford to go to top tier schools? Who goes to top tier schools? The majority is not marginalized communities. And so when I think about that, I think about resumes the same way. Put your blinders on and being able to look at the skill set that you actually need from someone. You can buy a pretty template on Pinterest. It doesn't mean that your resume is better than someone who didn't know that you could go do that. And so, I even think about it a step further, beyond the template. Not everyone has been given the knowledge to even know what a good resume is. I went to business school. They forced me to have a class every single year that essentially was like how to shake a hand, how to write a resume, how to put a portfolio together. And I thought it was stupid then. However, it's obviously been very beneficial to me. Not everyone has that privilege. And when you think about tech now, not everyone has a college degree. And they're not really teaching resumes in high school. So we can't expect people to know what they don't know. And then, for me, a lot of people fought back and they were like, oh, well, Google is free. But that's another privilege as well. Not everyone has internet access. And then everyone was like, well, what about the library? And I was like, how is everyone going to get to the library? You need transportation. And so when you really think about it and unpack it, for me, it is really about being able to dive into the skill set. And unless this person is, okay, and like obviously like graphic designers and things that like have technical, like make things pretty skill sets are different. But if you're looking for someone in customer success or customer support or whatever it is, we should be able to put pretty templates and like strong narratives aside to really understand the skill sets we need and then have human conversations with people. And, the fight back I get on this is like, well, I have to talk to more people. Yeah, that's in general, you should be talking to more people to create a diverse pipeline. So this shouldn't actually be the antithesis of what you do. It should be normal.
Yeah.
I'm also on board with I'm really on board with like just getting rid of resumes. I actually am not a big resume person. I am super happy to like, if you're like, hey, I don't have an updated resume, but my LinkedIn is updated, that actually does not bother me at all. I am really on board with like, let's get rid of resumes.
Well, I think there's a major disservice that is happening, and this is something that has bothered me for a while. I think there's a major disservice that's happening on both sides. I think that you're absolutely right that there is not enough consistent information out there about resumes, or even just like, what are you trying to communicate in your job search process? Like that is not, you talked about high schools don't really teach resumes or whatever. In my 6 years or so as a resume writer, I actually started in college career services, and I've talked to a lot of college career services people or employers who have had potential candidates come in from their college career services and what have you. There are many, many colleges out there that are giving out really poor, outdated information about the job search, about resumes, what have you.
Like the one-page rumor.
What's that? I'm sorry.
The one-page rumor that your resume can only fit on one page.
Yeah. The other side of the disservice I really feel is that more and more, especially with as many candidates as there are out there, there's not enough understanding there's not enough good training, I feel like, on the recruitment and hiring side that lets the decision makers on that side see the potential in people that come from a background that is something they're unfamiliar with, whether that's culturally or it's work-wise. They're doing a career change and they're not, they don't have the same qualifications as what these decision makers think they need. I really think there's a disservice on both sides, and I've been trying for a while now to figure out how we can put information out there that helps the communication be what everybody needs on both sides. How can we teach job seekers how to communicate themselves the way recruiters and hiring managers need to hear it, but also teach recruiters and hiring managers how to see between the lines a little bit more and see the value that may not be fully communicated, but that is still there if you know a little bit about career changes or certain industries or things like that. So I am not at all against that idea that, hey, resumes don't work. I think it's that, they certainly can. I wouldn't do this if I didn't think they could, but I think it's that we're doing a disservice to everyone involved in the process, because there's not an organization that says, yo, this is how things need to be communicated. Yep. This is what you need to look for as a recruiter or a hiring manager. This is what you need to say as a job seeker. So that's a big sort of black hole for me that I don't fully know how to fix, but is really on my mind and on my heart to try and fix for people.
And I think a lot of it is really on the hiring recruiter side, is like, we really need to blow up what people's idea of best talent is and like what top talent looks like. There is no correlation between where you went to college and your ability to be a good employee. And we're convinced that if like you went to Harvard versus like if you went to like a state school, you're going to be like a top employee. That's not a thing. Right. And I would really wish we would break the idea around that, because I promise you, like almost all of our undergrads are like the same thing. We all took our gen eds and then we like moved into whatever it is we were going to do. And the further away I get from my degree, the less it freaking matters. Yep. Like I graduated college like 10 years ago, which is horrifying to think about. Not quite 10, but like almost 10. And like, it really doesn't matter that much. And so I really wish we could break the idea. And it doesn't even just stop at top tier schools. It's now like, have you worked for a FANG company? Because if you worked at Google, you obviously must be top tier. And, for me, that just, it doesn't resonate. There's a ton of privilege in that. A lot of it surrounds location. You want to know who can pay to live in San Francisco? People who make San Francisco money. And so I think a lot about how we actually view top talent, and like the fact that it kind of just needs to be blown up a little bit.
Can you explain that acronym in case someone's not familiar?
Oh, FANG, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google.
There you go.
They're like the Harvards of the world, despite the fact that they consistently traumatize marginalized communities. But I guess
it's a whole nother episode.
Probably do that too.
I went to PWI myself. Those can be challenging environments for sure. But you bring up such a, gosh, I could speak about this stuff forever, because what you just unearthed, that there is an accepted sort of general truth about, what a top tier candidate is, but who created that? Why is it still in place now? That needs to be examined, and that's why it needs to be blown up. And it's like a new truth needs to be established, and a new truth that is inclusive is what we need to create, versus one that currently feels incredibly exclusive. In the nonprofit work that I do, we look at the organization I work with provides scholarships to immigrant students to go to college, and I'm looking at their financial aid letters, and it's $80,000 to go to USC or some of the a lot of schools, and that is insane. A year, $80,000, and so who has access to pay $80K to send their kid to school? And it just it's a cascading effect from then on. And so we really need to examine our structures and open them up so that people who have equal potential, that wasn't bought per se, have the opportunity to, show their value and have a chance.
One of the other things that I've been thinking about lately too is a lot of companies have GPA requirements, which like, again, my GPA was a really long time ago. But there's a ton of privilege in, did you get to just go to school and go to school? Or did you also have to go to school and work 2 jobs and like have an apartment? Because how can we expect those people to have the same GPA? I'm one of those people who I just got to go to school and play a sport. And like, I occasionally worked at American Eagle and then spent all my money on denim. But not everyone has that privilege. And how can you expect them to function at the same rate as someone who just gets to be a student? And, for me, I want hiring managers to really think about that as they're thinking about who they hire. Not everyone goes to school on like the same platform. Not everyone enters into college or enters the workforce from the same place, and really, again, thinking about the people who have different perspectives because they've had different experiences.
Yeah. On that note, I just finished writing a resume for a client who has a 3.0 GPA, if I remember correctly, but she worked 30 hours a week part-time to support herself through school. And so if you compare her to another student who just all they had to worry about was school, the potential of this other student, my client, she was balancing a job and going to school, and she still did pretty well. And so what does that portend for her capabilities within your workplace? Just because her GPA is in a 3.9, what are you overlooking in her balancing work and going to school? And so those are things that we need to open up our lens about and really, examine more critically in terms of who might be a better value add to your workplace.
I mean, even people who have what we would consider resume gaps, like I've never understood why the world views that as a bad thing. Like I actually retweeted something yesterday and it was like, can you explain your resume gap to me? And the person just said, no. Like I just don't understand why we expect people to work every single year until they retire. Whether you decide to become a mom or you decide that you're going to travel, I actually am in the process of finalizing a leave of absence, like sabbatical policy in my own organization. But like, we're so focused on work that we just want people to work for 60 years and then retire. I've never understood why we decide that people who have gaps in their resume are less worthy of employment than someone who's been doing the same thing for 10 years.
Yep. All right. I know we are a little bit past the hour. Madison, do you have just another few minutes or do we need to let you go?
For you, of course.
Well, thank you so
You feel
much.
special.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I wanted to ask was really just to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the organizations that you're working with. Specifically, your organization, Rage to Rainbows, I think is just a really beautiful concept. So I would love if you could share a little bit more about how it works and where that idea came from. And then any of your other organizations that you would like to talk about, feel free.
Yeah, so it's funny because we were just talking about networking. I actually met my co-founder for Rage to Rainbows on LinkedIn. And we had like messaged a little bit back and forth before all of this. But basically having a large platform, like I said in the beginning, comes with a ton of people who don't like you. The scale on which those people live is very different. There are people who just like don't like you. But then there are people who send you death threats. And so I was like getting really in the weeds on a lot of my, especially around the time of George Floyd, getting really in the weeds with like just some really harmful commentary. One, because I am incredibly snarky. I like to have the last word. And on the other side, like I'm always trying to educate people. And I had to really learn that not everyone wants to be educated. Some people just want to minimize your existence. And so I was like, okay, well, how can I like take the power back into my own hands? Because the one thing I know is if you are comfortable like tormenting me, some stranger you don't know on the internet, you're probably making someone else's life and your actual life pretty miserable. Whether it's a coworker or someone who works for you or your neighbor or the person who bags your groceries, like you're probably making someone miserable somewhere along the lines. And so I made a post on LinkedIn, which again was for me was not a spicy post, but it was like, for every racist comment, I'm donating to blank organization in your name. For every sexist comment, I'm donating to this organization. For homophobic ones, I'm donating to this. And it was like a list of 7. And oh my God, you would have thought I like kicked people's puppies. I got like death threats just from that post. And I was like, well, now I have to do it. And so Emily, who is my co-founder, had originally been like, I want to match you. And then we kept seeing like, oh my God, people wanted to match us. And we were like, well, let's like make this an actual thing. And so we worked on it for about 6 months and launched it in November of last year. And we've since raised like $13,000 for different organizations. Because for me, it is about how do I put the power back into my own hands when you're trying so hard to make me feel small? How do I take that and make sure that I'm protecting the people in your life that you actually have power over? Because it's not me.
Yep. And how do people find that if they decide they want to donate?
It is rage2rainbows.com. And we actually have you donate on your own and then just report with us and then report like what it was for. That way you never have to question like where your money went. But it's really more about the accountability piece of it and the community piece of it. And then I also have a podcast. It's called Bye Bye Binary, which we do have a community for queer folks. So if you are queer and you like other queer folks, we do have that. And then the podcast is for everyone.
All right. And that's a Rage to Rainbows with the number 2, rage number 2, rainbows.com.
Yep.
Andy just put it in the chat for you guys, so you
Okay,
can find
awesome.
that right there.
Yeah. All right. So we have a couple of like signature questions we're going to round off with, and then we'll let you get back to your day. If you could wake up tomorrow and one thing that you feel is really broken in the hiring process was fixed, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think for me, oh God, that is hard. One thing. One thing.
The thing that
I
like
guess,
bugs you the most.
all of it.
All of it? Yeah, I figured you're gonna go there.
Honestly, I think it's the resume thing and how we view people as qualified candidates versus non-qualified candidates. When in actuality, the only difference is where they like went to college or where they grew up or whatever it is.
Or their ability to just communicate effectively what their
Yep.
value really is.
100%.
Yep. Cool. Last question for you here. If you could reveal one employer insider secret to job seekers that would help them get hired more quickly, what do you think that would be?
You have power too. You are interviewing people and companies as much as they are interviewing you. And do not forget that. I know that interviewing feels stressful and you're always like, oh God, what questions will make me look good? Don't ask the questions that make you look good. Ask the questions that you need answers to. I don't care if it's about PTO. I know people get annoyed with the PTO question, but I promise you I'm asking it because I like to not be at work sometimes. Ask the questions that matter to you.
Well, and the great thing about that, and it kind of ties in with what we were talking about earlier, is, you know, you were talking about those really great questions that you can ask that just get right to the point about certain things. If you are asking the questions that are important to you, not only are you going to be able to sort of judge and make better decisions about the company based on what their answers are, but also if you're at a company that does align with your values, they're going to appreciate you asking those questions just as much as you appreciate their answers that they give you when you ask them. So if you're asking the questions that you think make you look good, that may make you align with a company that you don't actually align with. But if you're asking the questions that matter to you, like Madison is saying, then you're going to find companies that align with you, not just because you're asking the question, but because that's what matters to you and that's what matters to them. And that's where that alignment will come from.
And we are so conditioned to think that we need to trade our silence and our identities for a paycheck. And it is important to know, like, you deserve to take up space. Even when it is while job searching, like, you deserve to exist in your full state. Whatever that is. And so please don't feel like you need to tone it down. And I know, especially as Black women, we always think about, how does my hair look? How does my hair look? Do I straighten my hair for this? Straighten it, don't straighten it. Just know that, like, you deserve to take up space, and whatever that means for you and whatever that looks like for you is valid.
Yes, agreed.
I love that. Madison, where can people find you? Where should they look for your content?
I'm on LinkedIn. My name is Madison Butler. I am on Twitter. I do swear a lot on Twitter. But my Twitter is corporate unicorn, but it's spelled wrong. So I'm going to put it in the private chat, and then maybe you can communicate that to people. It's basically corporate, but without the extra O.
All right. I'll do that right now. And then you also have a website, right?
Yes. bluehairedunicorn.com.
Perfect. Anything else that you want people to know about you before we let you go?
No, just if you're interested in the book, you can sign up for my mailing list. I'll send out updates at some point.
Love that. I unfortunately was not able to share your Twitter handle, so maybe Andy could do that for me. Share Madison's Twitter handle. Okay, perfect. For some reason, Restream won't let me comment, so I can't do that. But thank you so much for being here, Madison. Nii Ato, did you have anything else that you wanted to say or anything?
Yeah, no, I just hope that everyone listening took away some motivation, some empowerment in terms of what you have control over in your job search, and not being afraid to look for environments that are going to serve your needs, because you're serving them. As an employee, you're paid to serve them. But what we're trying to help you understand is that they need to serve you as well. It's an equal exchange of energy. And if the employer is giving you negative energy, you don't need to be there. And your paycheck is not worth your psychological safety. And so just take everything on board that Madison said, this whole conversation, and find ways to empower yourself through your questions, through doing your research. Talk to as many people as you can before you apply and interview somewhere. Get the dirt that you need to decide whether or not it's a good fit for you, and see if what the present employees are saying matches what former employees are saying, because the former employee is going to keep it real, and the current employees have to put a little bit of a veneer on things because they still work there. So if the two match, you're probably going to be, it's a good look. And so, yeah, so be empowered and work up to it. It's not going to happen overnight. We're all works in progress, but you will eventually get there.
I love that very much. Thank you, Nii Ato. Thank you, Madison, so much for being here. This has been an absolute pleasure. To everyone watching, thank you all for being here. And I know we're a little over, so I'm just going to let things go. Everybody have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye,
Take
y'all.
care. Bye.